Hey guys, it's me again. Happy afternoon. Just cracked open a bang. And now we're gonna finish up, I swear to you, the parasites lecture. Okay, so the last topic that we had to go over, there's actually two of them, worms, and then I'm gonna talk just a tiny little bit about arthropods. Okay, so remember in microbiology, the fancy scientific word for worms is this right here, helminths, okay? Helminths refer to any type of worm. So what these have in common is they're multicellular. So the cells are eukaryotic, they have a nucleus, they're big and complex. And when we're talking about the types of worms that we can potentially be parasites, they fit into two categories, flatworms and roundworms. And just to warn you, yep, you're gonna see some pictures of worms, okay? But I'll try to get past them as soon as I can. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about flatworms. So once again, I'm not going to test you on specific names of worms. If you go on to take parasitology, then you'll get all of that you can handle. But when we look at flatworms, one of the categories are flukes, okay? And flukes, if you see them in bodies of water, sometimes they're mistaken for leaves because they have such a leaf flat appearance. But you can have liver flukes, lung flukes, intestinal flukes. They often have very complicated life cycles, which mean, I have to live for a while in a snail and then go to a particular species of crayfish and then go into, okay, hold on. Good God. See, this is what I worry about. So dumb. Yeah, I can't even turn off the auto thing on YouTube, which no big surprise because I'm a boomer, right? Okay, so you wonder how they could even reproduce themselves because a lot of times their life cycles are so crazy and long and they have to be in all of these different species of organisms, but obviously they get it done because they still continue to live and flourish and cause infections. You may hear the term schistosoma. That refers to flukes that live in the blood. Okay, probably the flatworm that you're most familiar with are tapeworms. So tapeworms, when humans get them, it's often because we've consumed pork or beef or fish that wasn't fully cooked. Now, does this mean sushi is dangerous? I don't think so. Sushi grosses me out. There are a lot of things I'd rather eat except for that, but those of you who like it, have at it, good for you. Am I terrified that you're gonna get a tapeworm from it? No. Of course, like every business, you can end up with restaurants that don't follow guidelines and, we have that kind of danger anywhere. So tapeworms, okay, corgis, trying to teach here, can grow actually up to 50 feet long. They can be really, really long. And when they run into problems, especially in humans, it's when they end up in other areas of the body that they're not supposed to go to. So tapeworms, and really most parasitic worms, they want to live in your intestines because it's a constant supply of nutrients and there's plenty of space. Where we run into problems is if they mistakenly end up in the brain. The person can have seizures. They can disrupt other organ function like your lungs and your liver. The other thing that I really want you to understand about these parasites, excuse me, I have to take a swig. And especially when it comes to worms like tapeworms, they are not meant to be in humans because humans do not end up helping them perpetuate themselves in their life cycle. So if they infect cattle live outside. They poop as they're walking around in a pasture. And that's how the eggs can get spread to other cattle because then they'll eat grass that's contaminated with eggs. If a human being gets a tapeworm, we're gonna get really, really sick and we're gonna, go to the doctor and get some meds and kill that organism. So A lot of these parasites, they're not targeted at humans. They're not meant to infect us. It doesn't help them. And in fact, it usually hurts their survival. So we refer to that as being, kind of the terminal host. Because, most humans don't poop outside, though anything can happen in the pandemic. We'll see what happens. But most of the times we don't. And when we get sick, we're going to go to the doctor. But other, organisms don't do that. So here's a typical tapeworm. This is the head. And this is what's going to be embedded into the walls of the intestine. It has, little hooks, and I'll show you a close-up of that. And then when you look at the body of the tapeworm, when you look over here, you can see that there are individual segments, kind of close up on that. So each one of those little segments contains both male and female gametic cells. And so basically it can keep reproducing itself. What this means is that if you get rid of the body of the tapeworm, but you don't get rid of the head that's embedded into the intestine, the tapeworm is just going to grow back because those segments can keep reproducing themselves. So when humans take medication to get rid of tapeworms, it kind of has to be pretty nasty because you've got to create an environment that makes that head so uncomfortable that it's going to detach and let go. So yeah, not a lot of fun to be on those meds. I know for dogs, it's a one-time treatment, so I don't know why they can't do that for humans. I know a difference in the physiology, but normally when dogs get tapeworms, it's, one treatment and then, they're good to go. So I've heard people talking about how, I'd love to get a tapeworm because then I could lose a bunch of weight and then, just get rid of it. That would be great in theory. However, when a person has a tapeworm, they are sick. They're not feeling good. They may lose a bunch of weight. They're also going to get super dehydrated because they're going to have nonstop diarrhea. So, it's not a good plan. And can you order tapeworm cysts on the internet that people actually try to use for weight loss? Yes. Is it stupid? Yes. Don't do it. Okay. You're just going to end up getting really, really sick. So here is what I was talking about, the head of the tapeworm. So pretty nasty, and it can embed with these little hooks up here. That's what embeds into the wall of the intestine. The other thing is the reason, so I'll get to this first. The reason these organisms are so successful is because they are flat. And what they do is they lay against the surface of your intestine flat, and then they can absorb nutrients directly into their cells. And so because they're flat, that gives them the maximum surface area to be able to absorb nutrients. So it's much more efficient. It's not like the tapeworm just feeds through this mouth and then sends it out to the segments. All of those segments can lay flat against your intestine and be stealing nutrients from you, as it's just laying there. By the way, if you hear growling in the background, my corgis are having a big wrestling match, so that's what's happening. Okay, so this is a pretty dramatic photo, and what you see here is a patient who's having a very substantial, long tapeworm removed from him orally. Okay, so we'd like to think that, you can just take some medicine and then you poop out the tapeworm and you never have to look at it. Unfortunately, that's not the case. A lot of these worms, one thing they don't like is heat. And so if the patient develops a fever, a lot of times those worms, they're going to head towards the nearest exit to get away from that heat, whatever it happens to be. We'd love for it to just be the rectum, but they can also come out the nose, they can come out the mouth. So yeah, yet another reason to, not get a tapeworm on purpose. And really that's true for any worm, even when they're tinier, like pinworms, they want to get away from excess heat. This should also be another point in this class where you kind of sit back and reflect and realize that, oh my God, we are so incredibly lucky to be living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where, yeah, we complain about the weather, whatever, but we also have a water treatment plant. And so we are able to get a clean water supply. So it's great that we have Doctors Without Borders and they go into these communities that don't have a clean water supply or adequate medical treatment. And, you know, they deworm them, yay, you know, you're worm free. But guess what? Then they go right back to their communities where they don't have clean water, and the cycle repeats itself again and again and again. You know, the point to where we can stop these infections is really to get everyone on the face of the earth clean water. And unfortunately, that's not a reality right now. Okay, second category are roundworms. And these are probably the ones that, unless you're working in veterinary medicine, these are what you're gonna see more often. So once again, you don't have to memorize any of the organisms. I just want to point out that probably if you see patients with roundworm infections, normally it's going to be this genus, which is Ascaris. Another infection that you might see, especially if you're working in, you know, primary care or pediatrics, probably in eastern Iowa, a couple times a year, you'll have a mother bring in a diaper that has worms in it, and she'll be freaking out and feeling like she's the worst mother on the face of the earth. Kids get pinworms, okay? That's what that is. And the eggs of pinworms, you know, usually it comes from a dog, maybe that has had pinworms, and then they poop in the soil. But realize you can have a dog that pooped there 5 years ago, and potentially those pinworm eggs can still be there. And what do kids do? They play in the dirt, and then they put their hands in their mouth, and then occasionally they can get a pinworm infection. But I stress, occasionally. It doesn't happen a lot. I still think there is far greater advantage to letting your kid, first of all, play outside because it's good for the imagination, getting small doses of different allergens and antigens is really good for, you know, decreasing the incidence of asthma and allergy, those types of things. So, you know, if your kid plays outside, are they automatically going to get pinworms? No. And even if they do, you know, it's a pretty easy fix. I think it's much more traumatic for the parent than it is for the child. I know my mom, so this is when, you know, she's a mom back in the 60s and the 70s. She used to talk about, you know, the neighborhood wives, how they would tell if their kid had a pinworm infection is they did what was called the popsicle test. And so, you know, when you eat a popsicle, there's always kind of a stain or some of the sugar left on the popsicle stick. And so they would place that stick in the crib or in the bed by the child when they were sleeping, come in with a flashlight, you know, at about midnight, and the worms would be drawn out and be attracted to the sugar on the popsicle stick. So that was kind of their cure. I think my mom just liked to eat popsicles and wanted an excuse because I don't remember any of us ever having pinworms. Who knows? You can also, Dr. Oz, one of his cures is, or one of his diagnostic procedures, I guess, put a piece of Scotch tape over the child's anus and then look at it in the morning, and the worms want to come out at night. And so they will actually be clinging to the tape. Very creepy, but like I said, I think it's much more traumatic for the parent than it is for the child. One interesting thing too is that worms were actually the origin of the medical caduceus, which is shown right here. And so when you graduate from your professional program, whether you're in nursing, you know, some other type of medicine, veterinary medicine, hopefully you'll earn the right to wear that symbol as a medical professional. And when you look at it, you see like there's two snakes wrapped around a staff. Well, when that first originated, when you look back into history and look at what the primary job was of ancient physicians, it was actually to travel from village to village to try to remove parasites from people. And the way they would do that is wherever the worm happened to be coming out, you know, whether it was through the skin or it was through the rectum, they would take a stick and then they would slowly wrap the worm, you know, twist the stick. And so they would pull out as much of the worm as possible, clip it off, okay, we've removed a bunch of your worm, now you can go on about your life. So that's actually where that comes from. Eventually, someone decided, you know, instead of having two floppy worms, let's replace it with two badass looking snakes. So, but that's where that symbol comes from. Okay, so I know we have at least one vet tech student in the class. Megan, I believe that's you. So here's an example of ascaris or a roundworm infection in dogs. Yeah, heartworms can be a very deadly disease. The good news is it's prevented by a delicious chewable that the pet only has to take once a month. My dogs love it. Can dogs recover from heartworms? Yes, they can, but the treatment sometimes can be more fatal than the actual heartworms and kill them faster. The reason is what the treatment does is it causes all of these worms to basically disintegrate, and then unfortunately they can clot, they can form an embolism or a stroke, and the dog can die that way. So sometimes the treatment is, you know, more caustic than the actual disease, but completely preventable. Okay, this is a horrific photo, no doubt about it. Well, first of all, this person is alive, okay? This is a child who is being dewormed. So he had a big ascaris infection, which just means roundworms, and was given medication, and that caused him, the worms to be killed, and then basically, you know, got rid of them in what we call a bolus or a big clump. Once again, I'll take that picture off so you don't have to look at that. Oh, like this is any less horrific, but once again, that child is, quote, cured, and then he goes back to his village where, once again, we don't have clean water, and so it's repeated again. This is a case of what we call filariasis, and we talked about this can also be caused by amoebas, but also tiny little worms can cause this as well. So you end up with these gigantic swollen limbs because the lymph nodes become blocked. And unfortunately, there's really nothing you can do about it other than to try to keep that area clean and hygienic. You'll notice over here, we have men in a tribe, and you can see obviously that their scrotums are gigantic, and that's because their lymph nodes are being blocked. But obviously, I mean, I'm not a male, but I would think that would be incredibly painful, obviously affect fertility and probably other functions. And what jumps out at me is if you look, I mean, that person is incredibly thin and malnourished. So these parasites are, you know, they're sucking the life out of people basically because they're stealing all of their nutrition. Okay. The last thing we're going to talk about are arthropods. So arthropods, here's what they have in common, okay? And you can think of them as bugs or insects. However, arthropods, they have three things in common, okay? Their bodies are segmented. They have their skeletons on the outside. So think of like a typical, you know, say, cockroach. You know, if you step on it and it crunches, it's probably an arthropod. And they have jointed legs. So yes, that includes insects, but also we have arthropods in water, you know, so a lobster, shrimp, things like that are arthropods. We're obviously going to worry about the ones that can live on people. Now, some of them cause symptoms themselves. So think of, you know, kids that have head lice or, you know, body lice, pubic lice, those types of things. The most important part, and we're going to get to this in chapters 14 and 15, is that most arthropods act as vectors, okay? So put a big star against next to that word. Hello, trying to teach over here, thank you. And what a vector is it is an organism, and a lot of times it is an insect like a mosquito. They carry pathogenic organisms like bacteria or viruses. Oh my God. I think the mailman's here. That's what's happening. So, or no, it's Sunday. I don't know what's happening. So when we talk about arthropods in the parasites chapter, we're going to talk about the ones that, you know, tend to live on people or are vectors. So obviously lice, fleas. One thing that's really scary that's happening right now, well, I mean, and this was before the pandemic, but there's actually a resurgence of the plague Okay, now think of when we mentioned the plague, we would think, oh my God, that happened way, way back in history. There has actually been a resurgence of active infections of the plague, most predominantly in homeless populations in Los Angeles. And it's because large numbers of people are living in close proximity, and they have no public health, they have no place to go to the bathroom or to take a shower or to do basic hygiene, and so they're becoming infested with not only lice but fleas. And fleas carry the organism that can cause the plague. And so we're seeing some of these diseases that, oh my God, that was back in the Renaissance era, or, way back in Europe in the 1600s, and now they're making a comeback. Deer flies can carry something called a bot fly, and I'll post a couple of videos about that. So obviously body lice, pubic lice, fleas can carry the plague. Mosquitoes can carry anything. One of the types of vectors that actually don't bite us or crawl around on us are common domestic housefly. But I love this quote. This is from one of your previous textbooks. Flies leave a trail of bacteria, vomit, and feces wherever they go. Wow, lovely. So you can kill houseflies, and I swear to God, it's not going to dent your karma. Flies really don't have a purpose. Except their maggots can be very useful forensically, but other than that, they just basically barf and poop on everything and carry viruses and bacteria. Okay, this is one, this is the tick, which is another arthropod. This is the deer tick that can cause Lyme disease, which, if not diagnosed properly, can be incredibly debilitating in terms of causing long-term symptoms that almost mimics, almost like a fibromyalgia. Really can be life-altering. The thing about Lyme disease is it presents like everything else, like we're learning about coronavirus. You get a headache and you get body aches and you feel kind of sick, and that can be just stress. But if you are a person who goes camping a lot, keep in mind that if you, have a tick on you, try to save the tick, because that can be tested and you can get a diagnosis much earlier. A lot of times too, people who have Lyme disease and have been bitten by this type of tick and then get the bacteria that causes that disease, they'll have a rash that kind of looks like a bullseye. That's one of the signs, but it doesn't always happen that way. So, if you're an outdoorsy person, keep that in mind. Yeah, and normally Lyme disease, very treatable, a 2-week course of antibiotics and it's gone. The key is getting it diagnosed properly, because it looks like so many other things. Okay, Parasite Pals. That was a fun little website. It doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not going to talk about that. So the last thing I just want to mention is, and I was so hoping that this was going to happen, I want to give a shout out to my friend Chrissy, who lives out in Los Angeles. So Chrissy had talked to me about an infection that she had with a 4-foot tapeworm, which she finally was able to get treated and have it removed. I was hoping while I was out on spring break to be able to interview her to find out about what her experiences were like, so you could hear it directly from someone. Unfortunately, having to fly back early, that didn't happen. So, who knows, maybe I can talk to her via, FaceTime or whatever. One of the things she did do for me, and this was so nice, she's a big crafting kind of gal, so she crocheted me a tapeworm. Isn't that beautiful? She named her tapeworm Lamont, and thankfully Lamont is long gone now, and Chrissy is healthy again. So anyway, I bet none of you have a crocheted tapeworm. So this ends our parasites lecture. So check Talon. I have a video on parasites with a worksheet that I want you to watch. I'll upload that link. And that's what you should be started on this week. And then Friday, I'm going to plan to upload an online quiz, or I guess I can turn this around this way. An online quiz that you would take. It would be quiz number, what are we up to? Quiz 9, I think. It would be just on the Parasites PowerPoint That's it. Okay. There's also no specific chapter on parasites in your textbook. So there will be no mastering homework over parasites, just a quiz and then a video worksheet. And then next we're going to start on viruses, chapter 13. So obviously that's going to be very timely information. And I'm going to start working on those lectures hopefully later today. Okay. So anyway, as always, hang in there. I want to give a shout out to all of you that are continuing to go to work because, you're CNAs or you're working, wherever, whether it's in a restaurant helping with takeout orders, you're working in a store. You are the guys that are basically keeping this country operational. If you're not being treated like heroes, you should be, because you're the only thing that's really keeping this country going at this point in time. So I want to give you a big, heartfelt thank you. I also want to give a shout out to those of you who are parents, who have kids at home. My corgis are driving me crazy. So I can't even imagine what it's like to have human kids at home. God love you. Remember, self-care is not selfish. So if you need to lock yourself in the bathroom and take a bubble bath, do it. You got to take care of yourself before you can help anyone else. Okay. But thank you for all that you are doing. I'll start working on the next set of lectures. I'll send out a remind text when I've posted, what needs to be done for the parasites, unit. Also, don't hesitate to email me questions, to text me questions on any of the material. We could potentially do like a FaceTime talk if you're not understanding some of the material. We'll figure out ways. Okay. So enjoy the rest of your day and I'll be in touch. Thanks.